Season 4 is going to be a distinctly darker season of The Dragon Prince, which is appropriate considering how all these characters have grown up significantly from the people they were earlier in the show and are willing to face realities that would have confounded them earlier. They have to face the fact that the world is not as simple and filled with dichotomies as they once thought. They want to do what's right, of course, but knowing what's right and deciding what's right is difficult, even in the best of circumstances. And even if you can decide what you need to do what's right, actually doing that requires a lot of hard choices and a lot of compromises. But the biggest change, I believe, that Season 4 will bring in how it muddles the moral waters of the first 3 seasons is how it will shift the focus from being on external targets to being on internal targets. Darkness is not something that only exists without, only in that scary person or that scary place on the other side of the river, but in us, in our hearts, and in our ambitions, even and perhaps especially when we are trying to change the world for the better. Now, of course, there are going to be big external threats this season, the most notable of which being Aaravos, our enigmatic, sly, Machiavellian Star Touch elf. But even Aaravos is a significantly different kind of threat than the likes of Viren and Sol Regum, the villains of earlier parts of the show. Aaravos is more of a tempter. He works on flattery and alluring people, and above all, convincing people who are distraught, who are uprooted, who don't really have a clear sense of who they are or what they should do, that he has the answers they seek, that if they trust him, all their problems will be solved. And so the shift to focus more on Aaravos inevitably leads to a shift in how the show positions ideas of corruption, brutality, ruthlessness, obsession, solipsism. All these are not only things to be fought from without, but to be fought within the self as well. Extremism and unbalanced and unstable views of the self and others become increasingly present in a time of great disorientation, of the destruction of what had previously been so certain and secure, which is replaced with a lot of opacity, a lot of murky, strange, hazy situations and difficult choices. These dark and destructive and extremist impulses need to be confronted within the self and reconciled with, instead of characters thinking that these impulses only exist in clear villains like Aaravos or even Viren, who by the time our heroes encounter him in Season 3 has completely slipped into obsession. But of course, we, the audience, know that he was not always so monomaniac that he was incapable of showing any compassion or thoughtfulness. And how even a normal, caring, tender-hearted person who wants to do what's right for all can slip into the darkness is best showcased in the character of Claudia. If you only base your judgments on Claudia in the first couple episodes of the show, you would never assume that she was going to become some obsessed, brutal, callous manipulator. Sure, she has a bizarre fascination with dark magic that's a bit unsavory, but her heart's in the right place. She's hardly cruel. She's hardly hard-hearted or narrow-minded. She's hilarious and goofy. consistently, she demonstrates herself to be a person who's fun to hang out with, who's not afraid to be a little wild or weird or inappropriate, even as doing so makes her father, Viren, groan. The show introduces a relationship budding between her and Callum in the early episodes of Season 1, and all the way into Season 2 when they almost kiss. In a certain sense, it's a perfectly ordinary and reasonable relationship. He's the stepson of the king. She's the daughter of the king's closest advisor. They've spent a lot of time together from an early age, and they start to fall for each other. The relationship is sweet and tender. There are no obvious red flags here. Now, one, of course, could point to Claudia's use of dark magic and say, that's evidence that she was doomed to go down this path the entire time, but that's not really a thoughtful or nuanced conclusion. Soren does far more in the early seasons of the show to fight for his father's ideology against what is good and sensible, and he shows a far less certain capacity for self-reflection. But as time passes, Soren changes. He has never gotten Viren's love, and he starts to wonder if he really should be so loyal and committed to Viren. Claudia, however, just doubles down on fighting for her father, even as doing so requires her to act in ways that are not particularly moral or thoughtful for the benefit of all. She becomes more doggedly committed to his schemes. Now, this does not mean that she accepts everything he does. She doesn't. She is made uncomfortable by a lot of what he says to her, and especially by his relationship to Aaravos, his little bug pal. Claudia is astute enough to know that Aaravos is taking over Viren's mind and possibly leading him in directions that are not necessarily ideal. And yet Claudia stays with him. She makes the choice to commit to Viren even as Soren departs his side and joins Team Callum. Now, the dichotomy of people either being basically programmed to act according to their material circumstances or completely free and thus completely responsible for every action they take is a false one. We don't have to choose between the empiricists that tie our knowledge of the world and our perspectives and values to our personal sensory experiences, and the existentialists who assert that we are completely free to decide who we are going to be at every single moment of our lives, and that no circumstances, no abstract ideologies can bind us to being a certain kind of person, and that we are acting in bad faith if we try to act like we are forced to be a certain kind of person or have a certain set of values based on experiences and social conditions in our past. Both are true to a certain extent. As Tolstoy discusses in War and Peace, drawing on the ideals of German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer, we are responsible for our actions, and we do actively bear the burden of the choices we make, but we are not aware of the consequences and complications of the choices we make, because our perspectives are necessarily limited. Our perspectives are bound to our own mores and our own values and our own experiences. We make choices based on a million different factors, many of which we don't even understand. These factors being both material and social ideological. And these choices we make lead us to circumstances and scenarios that we could not have predicted based on the choices that we made in the past and the information that we had back then. And so we find ourselves making choices that we could not have imagined ourselves making before. Though we bear the responsibility for our choices, we make them in circumstances that we could not have foreseen, even if they are circumstances that directly resulted from choices we made in the past. This is what happens to Claudia. If you had told her in Season 1, Episode 1, that she would be trying to kill Ezrin by the end of Season 3, she would have thought that was completely absurd. She would have taken that for a bad joke. And yet, that is what she's doing in Season 3. It is not because all her narrow-mindedness, all her solipsism, all her willingness to overlook the more deleterious aspects of dark magic were not in her basic personality always. It's just that they were not activated and amplified until she was placed in circumstances she could not have anticipated before. Now, Callum might view her degradation as strange and immoral and alien, but he shouldn't be too quick to judge, because what happens to her is not too different from what could happen to him. While Callum is not in as uncertain a series of circumstances as befell Claudia, he is in a position that he could not have anticipated being before, a position not really of his own making. Rayla has left him, and that means more than just the loss of love, although that hurts as well. It's the loss of someone he can really trust, someone he can really rely upon. He and Rayla were both outcasts. They both didn't really fit into the ideals and images of their respective societies, so they were stuck with their existential doubts, and only really began to heal when they had the company of each other. Now that's gone, and they're both the worse for it. They're both uprooted from that foundation of love and warmth and connection, and left in a position where they're more frenetic, more unstable, more willing to act rashly. Callum has suffered great loss before, such as in the case of Harrow, but that did not fundamentally shake his basic self-concept or his idea of the values he should hold. In fact, especially with Harrow's letter, he only became more confident in the idea that he should try as hard as he can to uphold the ideals that Harrow treasured. His relationship with Rayla was a new start for him and a symbol of peace and hope in the world, and with that gone, he's going to be more vulnerable. Aaravos will offer him the answers he seeks. He'll make a lot of flattering promises, and Callum might fall victim to those promises. So thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can, and you want to see more videos like this before anyone else. Keep watching The Dragon Prince Seasons 1 through 3, and we will be receiving Season 4 in less than 3 months, which is so wild to think about. Anyway, tune in soon for my next analysis. It will be coming soon. Promise you that. Thank you all again. Adios, comrades.